I'm the Brian from BrianMadden.com, which actually, since I joined VMware, I've had lots of meetings with people and like with different customers and stuff. And that's something we said about BrianMadden.com. And I'm like, yeah, I'm Brian. And they say, oh, like you were at BrianMadden.com. Like, what did you do there, or something like that? And I'm like, no, I'm Brian. Like, but the website lives on now. But I don't own the website anymore. So BrianMadden.com continues, and Brian Madden, the person, is working at VMware. All this stuff sort of in the EUC space. So anyway, though, we're here to talk about end-user computing. And I titled this talk sort of past, present, future. And so I want to kind of start at the beginning to sort of see how we got to where we are within EUC. How many of you here are sort of what you call like EUC people? Like doing desktops, VDI, mobility, RDSH, that kind of stuff? Okay. So, and me too. I mean, obviously, but I got my career started, doing like break fix kind of desktop support stuff, and it's blank on purpose. I got my career started doing desktop support stuff, and you like do the help desk. And how many of you started your careers in the help desk? That's respect. That's a good number. Me too. I feel like just like how everyone in this country should be forced to work retail at some point in their lives, to just instill a basic sense of human decency. I believe every IT professional should work in the help desk at some point. You learn a lot about, you learn a lot, more about like human psychology. And it's kind of funny because you grow up doing help desk and then doing desktop support and then kind of doing like desktop field work and break fix technician and application engineer and I remember then getting into SMS, and then I was allowed to get to the data center, and I'm like, oh, my desktop days are over. That was in '97, and here we are. But the history of EUC, in the beginning there was nothing. It was blank. Some things happened. We had Big Bang. We had dinosaurs. People showed up at some point. After people showed up, we started organizing into offices. Shortly after that, we had a computer, and we had a desktop computer, and then it wasn't probably more than 10 or 15 minutes before we had more computers. And as soon as we got more than one computer, we started to have to deal with how we're managing these sorts of things. And I think if I could summarize 20 years of desktop management, I think it's this. It's you pick up the phone and you call your Dell rep or your HP rep and say, just give me another pallet full of the second cheapest business desktops or the second cheapest business laptops that you have. Which of course, that's because you get the second cheapest ones because, to me it's like ordering wine at a restaurant. Like you don't want to be that asshole who buys the cheapest one, but it's like, come on, are they really different? So, you get the second cheapest pallet of desktops, and, you image them, and then you deploy them, and then over time you update them, and you patch them, and 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 then finally you're like, okay, we re-image it, and then you update it, and you patch it, and, that cycle kind of continues until eventually, like, 3 or 4 years has gone by, and you retire it. And then you put an image on the new one, and you deploy it, so then you update and you patch it, and the cycle sort of continues. And that's, if you're gonna summarize 20 years of desktop management, that's pretty much it. Now, of course, during this time, we're like, well, there's gotta be a better way. It's just a lot of legwork kind of getting out there and doing all this stuff. And, in the mid-90s, there was Microsoft SMS. Anyone? I was doing SMS. 1.1 was my first one. This is like in '96, so I never did the 1.0 days. And centralized management for Windows-based systems. Yeah, and it was great. And so we could, automate software and do inventories and hardware inventory and all that kind of stuff. And that was fine. And that carried us, from the sort of mid '90s, and it was okay, but it still was managing the same cycle until this happened. Yeah, flying angled briefcase man. I mean, this is, the first time I saw Citrix. This sort of, well, I guess I could say it changed my life, like quite literally in my case. But the idea of, wait, it's like PC Anywhere, but there's like one computer with multiple people, and I mean, it blew my mind. And for us, Citrix was used in those days for a lot of things. You could use it for performance improvements of client-server applications, or for improved security where you didn't have data on end-user devices and that kind of stuff. But it was cool because an almost accidental benefit of it is we could just install the application once, and then multiple users could connect, and they were sort of always up to date. And so we actually sort of realized that this Citrix thing could kind of be used as a way of managing desktops in a little bit more efficient ways. We don't have to worry about, did the patches go out, and did they reboot, and is one computer different than the rest, and that kind of stuff. So we were really looking at this, like, is the Citrix thing better than the old way that we've been doing over all these years? For some of us, it was yes. But for most of us, it was not an all or nothing thing. Like in 1998, 99, 2000, when Metaframe came out, we probably all used it, but none of us were saying, oh, this is fantastic, we're replacing all of our desktops with Metaframe. Right? None of us said that, right? There's a few CIOs that said that, but no one did. But it's fine, we use Metaframe for 10% of our users, or 15%. Maybe there was like some simpler call center users, but the rest of the users had real desktops. Or maybe there's one or two, like that Oracle Financials application that's updated 3 times a day, and it was easier to just put that on Citrix, but deliver it to all the users, even our traditional desktop users. But we were using Citrix for like 10%, and that was fine. And we were fat, dumb, and happy, and we didn't care. And then this happened. So VMware became a thing, and it's amazing how you were talking about technology adoption. How long did you go from never heard of VMware to all your production servers are virtualized? Like 2 years. This is exactly, by the way, when we talk about like you want to see some quick adoption. And we virtualized all the servers, and all the VMware fans and the VMware employees and the VMware sales reps of the world were like, well, we got to keep on selling. I can't, sir. We already sold all. We're already virtualized already. There's nothing more to go. Yeah. What are all those desktops doing out there? And we kind of had the idea, like virtualization, like, hey, let's virtualize everything. This is the way to do it, because if virtualizing servers is good, then virtualizing desktops, there's way more desktops than our servers. That must be even better. And that was the push. And a lot of people were like, oh, virtualization is the future, and VDI is the future. And by the way, I'm going to correct a misconception. I never said that this was the year of VDI, or that any year was the year of VDI. I want to be very clear on that. Someone said earlier, is this the year of VDI? I'm like, no! It has never been the year of VDI. Because the first time when this VDI thing came out and everyone got really excited about it, it was mostly people who were not traditional Citrix remote desktop people. It was mostly like virtualization people who were starting to push the virtualization desktops. How did that work out? It's the over-rotation. Did not end well. So we got sort of a bad taste in our mouths. And it's kind of funny because, like I said, RDSH, what was like Metaframe in those days, we used it for point solutions. We used it for 10%. 10% of our users, or 10% of our apps here and there. Well, the problem is that VDI was pitched back then as the great solution for the rest, for everything else. It's like for the other 90%. And that's really why it failed, is because there was probably a reason why those desktops weren't virtualized to begin with. And I say ironically, if we had kept VDI at 10%, it would have been very successful. RDSH was successful not because we used it for 100%, because we used it for 10%. If we looked at VDI and got another 10% of the use case, which ironically is what we're doing today, but we'll get to that, VDI wouldn't have failed. But the industry at large tried to take VDI to the other 90% that we couldn't get with RDSH. And it didn't work. And I mean, I had to write an entire book about this. The VDI delusion. This is the height of like VDI mania. And the picture, is a hammer pounding a screw, right? Because that was what we said about VMware in those days. Like, they were pushing VDI everywhere because they're the virtualization company. So when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. The VDI book basically said, in those days, in 2012, for VDI to be cost effective, you have to use shared images, right? Because we didn't have, storage was not as advanced as it is now, so we had to use, linked clones. Shared images means non-persistent, because the user logs off and they log back in the next time, they're going back to the base image. So we're non-persistent. Non-persistent means we need to lock you down. You can't have admin rights, you can't install your own applications, because if you did, they'd be gone the next time. It would just generate more help desk calls. Lockdown is hard. And the reason I say lockdown is hard is because a lot of people in VDI in those days, all their existing desktop computers were persistent. They weren't locked down. Users could do whatever they wanted. And they're like, oh, we're going to go to VDI, and we're going to lock it down because it's easier to manage. And I'm like, well, you don't have to go to VDI to lock down your desktops. You can just take away admin rights. I mean, we can do it right now. It'll take 2 minutes. Like, you don't need VDI to do that. And I'm like, actually, you know what? Let's do that right now. And they're like, oh, wait, we can't do that. Like, it's gonna break a lot of shit. I'm like, all right, so, yeah, good luck with VDI. The book's called The VDI Delusion. Pick it up now. So, locking down to me is much harder than VDI. And frankly, if you're gonna, VDI is about taking a desktop and moving to a data center that locks down and a shared image. Like, why not just use RDH for, at the time, was about the 10th of the cost of VDI. So this is 2012. This is 6 years ago. This is why VDI in 2012 did not take over the world. Now, the other issue we have is, 6 years ago, people were wanting to do VDI. It's like, oh, this is the future corporate desktop. It's the future enterprise desktop. Well, think about VDI is replacing what is on your desk. So what do you have on your desk? You've got a quad-core processor, actually probably 2 quad-core processors. You've got this crazy GPU. You've got a giant display, actually probably 2 giant displays. You've got 3D sound. You've got webcams. You've got all sorts of peripherals. This is what's on your desk. So that's before VDI. Now we go to VDI. So okay, we got the 8 cores. Actually, the server's got 8 cores. But we're putting 8 users per core, so you get an 1/8 of a core. And we'll give you a screen on your thin client. And next sound, yeah, we got sound. Boop. And I mean, can VDI deliver that experience in 2012? Of course it can. We can deliver the hell out of that experience. But this is not what users were asking for, So this is kind of the sort of problem we went into. It's like the users at home had a transformer, and then we gave them VDI, and it was a GoBot. Everyone clapping had GoBots. I'm a bus. I'm a robot. I'm a bus. I'm a robot. So it's tough. Now the good news is this guy existed. This is Gordon Moore. So the whole Moore's law thing about processor density or transistor density, doubling every 18 months or halving the price, whatever you want to take of that. So everything I talked about VDI during the first push of VDI was 6-7 years ago. But we've had 6 or 7 years of Moore's law sort of taking effect since then. And in fact, even just a year or 2 after that VDI delusion came out, I wrote an update to it called The New VDI Reality. Very few people know of this book. Not as catchy of a title, I guess. But basically said that even in the couple years since that happened, persistent disk images were possible because we had better storage technology and flash and prices came down. GPU virtualization became a thing. So that was just not possible in 2012, even though all desktops had GPUs. Again, just the cost for processing and IOPS in the data center just continued to come down, where we can actually, in a cost-effective way, deliver a good experience from the data center. And it was great. So it's like, we can do VDI now, right? Yeah, in 2014, we can absolutely do VDI now. So now in 2014, this is still, I'm talking 4 years ago, if we want to take a desktop off the desk and put it in the data center, we can do it via VDI, or we can do it via RDSH. So we have those two options. Now, just because we could do VDI, do all of our desktops become VDI or RDSH? Of course not, because go back to what our point was. You have to have an internet connection. It has to be a good connection. It can be more expensive from the data center. What problems are you trying to solve in the first place? Remember, we're trying to solve the whole problems of this management, deploy, update, patch, deploy, update, patch. It's all still Windows. So what we end up with is, yeah, we can do VDI and RDSH now, and some of our desktops and some of our applications are, but not all of them are. So, we start looking at what our VDI solution is, or what our RDSH strategy is, and it makes sense, but it's a tiny little sliver of our entire desktop environment. So, what we do, we can have the most, the best well-run VDI environment on the planet, but we still have all of these physical laptops and desktops that are out there that we sort of have to deal with as well. And that's kind of the issue here, because this is a VDI desktop. You make the best VDI in the world, and it's smooth running, it's got GPUs and IOPS, and it's got 3D sound and everything you could possibly need, and you deliver to the user. I mean, it looks pretty much like exactly what happens when you buy a laptop at Best Buy and open it up. So you do the best VDI in the world, and all that does is get you to the starting line of dealing with Windows. It doesn't solve anything. And look if we think about everything that we need to make an enterprise Windows desktop. Application installation, app virtualization, image building and management, app licensing, GPOs, user profiles and settings, app compatibility, layering, departmental versus global apps, user security, browser compatibility, office integration, using desktop designs from tablets and mobile devices, network performance, desktop performance, backup, file services, printing, antivirus, desktop security, Windows versions, app and Windows software updates and patching, remote troubleshooting, and 32-bit versus 64-bit apps, and resource allocation. To name a few. This is, if I'm a Windows desktop admin in a company, here's what I'm thinking about. And the worst part about this is I'm thinking about this is Windows issues I'm thinking about. These are Windows desktop issues I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about these regardless of whether I'm delivering that desktop via VDI or via RDSH or via traditional laptop and desktop. I have to deal with all that kind of stuff. So like I said, even though I built the best VDI, it didn't solve any of that kind of stuff. It just got me to the starting line. Okay, great, now I've got a desktop. Now what? And it didn't help us, by the way, that the VDI and RDSH, we were doing what? Citrix Zen App, Zen Desktop. We were doing VMware Horizon to manage those. But we weren't using those products to manage our physical desktops back in the day. That was like SCCM or something like that. So now we had, by adding RDSH or by adding VDI, we now actually doubled the management platforms that we need in our environments. Like I publish an app, for Horizon, but that's only to the Horizon users. I also need to publish it in SCCM and package it and all that kind of stuff. So all we've done is just added another delivery mechanism and double what we have to manage. So throughout all this, we're looking at this stuff and we're like, okay, there's got to be a better way for all this, right? There has to be. This is unsustainable. And when we're asking these questions, this is kind of happening, late 2000s. We're asking these questions. What happened in the world? The iPhone came out, and users went bonkers over this, and using it for everything, and they love it. Which, by the way, if I may sidebar, at Citrix Synergy last week, 2 weeks ago, Henschel talked about how, those millennials with their iPhones, and they have to have the latest everything. I mean, how many of you have iPhone 10s right now? I'm including myself. Put your hand down if you're under 40. All right, I'm gonna pretend all your hands are up. My point is that like all this talk about, like it's very easy to blame millennials. Oh, those millennials, they want their applications their way and they need their iPhone, they're delicate snowflakes and everything. Yeah, we're all delicate snowflakes. I got news for you. Like old people want iPhone 10s also. And old people don't like using Windows with the VPN and online file shares and domain join locked on laptops and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, when the iPhone came out, obviously users loved it. IT admins were tempered to negative response or possibly angry about having to deal with it. And because the reaction really was like, oh my gosh, we have to manage these things now. Users are bringing these into the company. At first we were like, we ignored it, and that lasted a couple years, and then it's like, well, I guess they're gonna do it anyway, and this kind of thing. So what do? We went back to the playbook. How do we deal with Windows laptops? How do we deal with Windows desktops? We own them. Like, wrap our arms around them, lock them down, take away admin rights, and you can only do what we say you can do. So like, iPhone, Android, Windows Phone was a thing back then. How do we can't control this now. And like, these aren't even real, there's no real apps on here as we thought when they first came out. So, you know what? I can handle this. We need to allow our users to be productive on our mobile devices. Bam. Got it. VDI, RDSH, bam. I can do it. Oh yeah, you want Android? I got your Android. You want a Windows Phone even? Bing! I can do that too. So this is how we solved. And you went to these conferences back in those days, and like that was our solution. Like, oh, just our corporate apps are Windows. We will put the Windows on the iPhone. Problem solved. Same shit, different barrel. Was kind of how it ended up. And we were like, okay, well that's not entirely workable. This systems management server, the way that we manage these traditional desktops and laptops out there, like I said, put it in a domain, lock it down. That's what we like. When I see this thing, I want to treat it like the same way I treat a Windows desktop, which is lock it down. And so how did that work out? Well, it's kind of blurry. That's a gate. With no offense. And so you see on the first snow how efficient we are at that kind of security. And that's this whole consumerization of IT thing, because no matter what, we say you're not allowed to, no corporate attachments can go to non-corporate domain addresses in your email system. Nailed it. And then the user, shoops, they Gmail the files themselves. Or they, you're not allowed to do, you need the VPN with two-factor authentication in order to access, the file shares. We just use Dropbox. It's free for 5 gigs at that time, and now the files are out there. So it's funny because in those early days of mobile devices, we used MDM, mobile device management, which really was treat that thing as if it were a PC. Lock it down. We own it. We control it. We do everything to it. That evolved into mobile application management, which was a little bit more of a gentle touch. And the industry evolved, iOS and Android evolved, and it got to where we could manage only the corporate applications on it and not worry about the public, the personal stuff. And that's where it evolved into that whole EMM thing. So the enterprise mobility management, it took a few years, but between 2010, 2012, 13, 14, we actually got pretty good at managing these devices. I mean, we as an industry, and those problems were largely solved. So going back to my estate, I've still got my VDI and RDSH, which I'm doing with Horizon or Zen Apps and Desktop. I've got my physical Windows devices, which I'm doing with SCCM. So now I can add iOS and Android in the middle here. And I'm managing these with something, it's AirWatch, it's Zen Mobile, Mobile Iron, Mass 360. There's a bunch coming to that sort of thing. So I feel like at this point I'm okay. I'm starting to, things are coming in, I'm figuring out how to manage it. But my green box is on top of my different management platforms. I now have 3 different management platforms to manage sort of my entire estate. And of course, this is still how things were a few years ago, and we're kind of just just getting started, and we're like, there's got to be a better way to doing this, because in this picture, a lot of the work that I'm doing is for Microsoft Windows, but Windows is going away, right? Like we saw that with there's web apps, there's phones. We're doing Citrix and VMware with VDI. Is that new Windows, but SCCM? Like I don't really want to think about it because Windows is going away, I'm pretty sure. So we have to sort of look at the future Windows here, because all of us were like, Windows future is bleak. The keyboard is dead. I mean, we heard this. We're living in a post-PC world. The desktop is dead. Which these were all like real quotes, not from me. And the thing is, these are all we're dancing around the real question here. Like these are all kind of euphemisms for saying like Windows is dead, right? Like it's for sure that's happening, right? That Windows is dead. I think that's what I was thinking. I'm looking at Windows market share. Look at Windows usage. This is a real chart. Now, of course, there's no labels on these axes here. Yeah. Put it on there, and you see it's over 5 years, and it's going from like 94 to 91%. Let's unfuck this chart, and it looks like this. And Windows is dead, right?
Bill Gates also came out and said Windows is dead. 2011?
Oh yeah, this is the question. When did Bill Gates himself even say Windows is dead? 2011? And since then, they've had all these other successes like Windows Mobile and Cortana, and and this is look at Windows. This is Windows PC and laptop. This is Windows computer sales. In 2006, 240 million. 2016, anyone want to guess? 270 million. This is real data. This is absolutely real data. And so Michael Dell, my new boss, I guess, he tweeted back in 2014, since post-PC era started, 3.6 billion PCs have been sold. Pretty good post-era. I bet more products wish for the same. Now post-PC era. And this is one of the things that I've talked about this, and this is I've been using this slide for 10 years also. You heard the joke. In this world, I only know 3 things that will exist: cockroaches, Twinkies, and devices powered by the Microsoft Windows operating system. Hopefully, the overlord robot cyborgs are taking us running on Windows, and so when they blue screen, we won't fix them. So Windows is around for a long time. And even if you look at this in the enterprise, how many Windows apps do you have today in your enterprise? I don't know, 100, 200, 500, whatever the number is. Let's say we have 400 apps, and you can somehow migrate 1 app per month off of Windows, which, by the way, is crazy. Because migrating an app off of Windows means you have to find an alternative app that has the same features. And these are not little apps like moving off of MS Paint, because if it was easy, you would have done it by now. If you can somehow do like 1 app a month, that's still going to take you 33 years. So, at this point, I don't know if this is the case or if I don't know which is happening first. I think Windows will be fine. So the bottom line is we use Windows because of the apps. I mean, Windows, we have Windows applications, therefore we have Windows. That's sort of the way it works, at least from the enterprise standpoint. But still, we're like, yeah, but there's got to be a way that we can modernize this, right? Because we know at the same time, maybe the number of Windows PCs is increasing, the number of Windows apps, there's a lot of them. But there's also other apps coming around them. We've got native mobile applications and SaaS apps and web apps and all that kind of stuff. So there has to be a way that we can modernize it, and it's not this. I can tell you that. This is not the way that we're modernizing our Windows applications. It's interesting because in order to think about how we modernize this, we almost have to take a step back and look at what is a desktop really? Because we talk about Windows and we keep Windows because of the applications, but it's a Windows desktop. But what actually makes up a desktop? And the way I look at it, there's actually like 8 sort of pieces that all come together to form a desktop. You've got the device hardware interface. So if you've got a Windows laptop, what is Windows on there? It's a hardware interface, for the laptop. It's the user interface. It's an application runtime that allows applications to be written towards it and run. It's an app launcher. It's a way for users to find and start the applications that they do. It's a provisioning target. So I install apps onto this device and then they put them in the start menu and the registry and that kind of stuff. It's app integration. So copy and pasting and dragging and dropping and Olay and all the plugins for each other and all that kind of stuff. It's a framework to allow applications to talk to each other. It's a security container because I log into the desktop and then I've got my token, and then that token allows me to do or not do different things. And then finally, it's a configuration container. So all the profile and policy settings about the device and the time zone and where I am and everything else for configuration that I do, I'm configuring the desktop. So to me, this is a desktop. When we're talking about like forget even Windows desktop for that matter. When I say what is a desktop, I'm talking about it's those 8 things.
It's like microservice.
So, and by the way, this is not just a Windows thing. So yes, it could be a Windows thing, but Mac, iOS, Android, all these devices have some version of those components that make up the UI and the OS and sort of the desktop or whatever it is we're running on all these devices. And then what's interesting, the Windows desktop itself is fairly monolithic. Like you can't really envision necessarily one of those pieces without the other 7 or breaking them apart. But what if we actually tried to do that though, and like just pick a random mobile device, and okay, the hardware interface that's here. In this case, Android is the hardware interface to this mobile device. The UI that is running here, the app launcher I can swipe through and select and start my applications from there. And then the app integration as far as copy paste and open in and secure containers and all that kind of stuff. So I could see that of those 8 pieces that make up the desktop, like 4 of them kind of have to be locked into the device, right? But the other stuff doesn't necessarily have to be. So I can have those same 4 components on a device with a keyboard and mouse. It could be a Windows machine, it could be a Mac. It's the same. The components are different for each one, but it's the concept. The same components are there. So what's that mean for these other ones? The configuration container, that provisioning targets, the security context. Those are really more user-based settings, tied to a person. And it sort of applies whichever device that person is using, those kind of go with them. But those things are not necessarily tied to a specific piece of hardware. And then, so I guess it's the 7. The 8th one was just the app runtime. And the app runtime, of course, depends on the application and where it's running. That's sort of independent from all this kind of stuff. What we see is, today, we think of Windows as the desktop. It's all together, it's all Windows, and you put Windows. That's why we put VDI on our phones, because we didn't know what to do. The corporate desktop was a Windows desktop, and you want to access it from your phone, you do it via VDI. But when we start breaking up the Windows desktop into these 8 different components, where does that leave Windows? And the reality is that Windows almost becomes a type of middleware. We have Windows because we have Windows applications. Windows applications require Windows to run, but Windows itself is not necessarily the whole desktop package. Now, if I've got a Windows laptop, then it might be doing more, but if I'm using a Mac and I'm connecting to a published app out of Horizon on RDSH, in that case, that Windows is essentially just middleware. So if we keep that in mind and we sort of look back at what we're doing, let's go back to where we were on the device management side of things. We have Windows VDI, Windows RDSH. These are sort of data center based Windows. I've also got Windows on my physical laptops and desktops that are out there. I've got Mac OS. There's lots of Mac OS devices out there. Chrome OS is a thing now. iOS and Android. We can't forget web and SaaS applications, which of course are a bigger piece of all of our portfolio. So if we sort of look at our device and app landscape, this is kind of what we're looking at today. But again, go back to how we're managing this kind of stuff. So we've got using Zen Desktop or VMware Horizon to manage the data center-based instances of Windows. I'm using AirWatch, Mobile Iron, Zen Mobile, Intune, whatever, to manage my mobile OSs. I've got SCCM to manage my physical Windows. I'm using Jamf maybe to manage Mac OS. I don't even know how I'm doing the cloud things. And now again, we're going to there's all these different systems. And they're all completely unrelated to each other. And so this is where, now if you want to, this is how the world was up through 2016 when I got the van and sort of drove around. If you want to get to the reason why I joined VMware as a UC person, it's because with VMware, it's all those green boxes are becoming one thing. And there's other vendors who are talking about this now. But so in the VMware world of things, Workspace ONE is that unified platform that actually does all of those things, and not just manages Windows mobile devices, not just manage Windows devices and data center, but also Windows physical devices and laptops and Mac OS and iOS and Android, and puts that all together in one thing. So the idea that instead of managing just Windows and Windows applications and just managing remote Windows, the idea we can manage it all in one platform becomes really interesting. And this to me though, like I said, there's a lot of people sort of doing this today, so this is not necessarily what's the most exciting to me. This, I believe, is sort of almost like table stakes about what it takes to have a conversation about UC in 2018. Where it really gets interesting is when we start looking at what's on top of that. So for example, so I just took all the same boxes before and just made them smaller, and then looked at, I'm using Workspace ONE here as an example on the back end. Look at what else we add to this. So we start adding in, security and identity, so single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, federation, all that kind of stuff. We look at how that plugs in. We look at how provisioning and access plugs in. We look at how configuration and personalization plugs in. We look at how data and files plug into this environment. Because previously these were all separate things. We had to do it on every single platform separately. But at the end of the day, when we are provisioning, if we give a user access to Concur, it's not, I'm saying you have Concur on your iPhone and then a different person says Concur from the web and a different person from Windows and all those sort of things. We want to provision that to the user, to the actual person. So when we look at, at the baseline, we have all the different platforms that we can actually manage as one environment. Hello, there we go. And
Switch to the lapel.
for real, what's TV?
It's not managed by Workspace ONE.
Well, tvOS.
Oh, answer for everything, this guy.
But and getting into where this is you're managing everything in actual native applications. So it's not just I'm pushing a web app out to a Mac, or I'm pushing a because the old days, you've got a Mac, well, you can publish them on an RDSH platform and then send a remote app down to a Mac, which is still possible. But you can also now push actual native Mac DMG files down to a Mac OS device and install them natively, and enforce lockdown encryption on Mac and all that kind of thing. So we're to the point now where we actually can for real manage all the platforms that users are actually using. But again, to me, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. Pardon me. So if we have all these devices, all these platforms, and there's one sort of management interface across all of them, where it gets really interesting is where the intelligence comes into this. And so, there's intelligence data lake that all of these components are writing up to, or I guess, by the way, at this point, I'm talking, I'm not necessarily talking about what VMware is doing in this space. VMware talks about this quite a bit, but I'm kind of talking more this is the vision for what EUC is becoming. Because everything that's on here is not VMware products, at least not today. But the idea is that all these devices that are being managed, we know the device, we know what applications are on them, we know where they're located, we know what patches they have installed, we know if they've been rooted, we know that, and again, across Mac, Windows, all this sort of stuff. What if we take all that information across our entire enterprise and put that up into one data lake? And then, we're also doing the identity management process. So we know who the person is and how they've authenticated and all their parameters. And once we put all that into the data lake. But do you know the term data lake? Like that's a real word. Data lake is not to be confused, this article says, with a data swamp, which is basically like a data lake that you set up and are excited about, but that don't actually use, I guess. But it's basically just, the idea is all this, I mean, we know everything about what the user is doing on all their devices. We know who the user is. We know what applications they have. We know how they're using their applications, performance counters, what they're launching, what they're starting and stopping, how applications are performing. You put that all into one sort of database. And it's actually going across the whole board. Now what can we start to do with this? Now it gets kind of interesting. So now of course you can do dashboards across all this, but now your actual dashboards across like actually everything, not separate dashboards for every separate platform. You're doing dashboards, you're doing reports, you can start doing notifications and actions. So you can sort of tie all this stuff together, like with notifications and actions. So if a user logs in from a device that does not have a certain hotfix installed, then we can actually use the action to temporarily lock them out until they update the hotfix on that device, and then they can connect back in. And that would lock them out from everything. So it wouldn't just lock them out from maybe Windows, and they get no, you can't log in from your phone either. But the very interesting part for these, so this to me, I mean, this is what we did. This didn't exist, a few years ago in the UC space. So we just had no way of doing this stuff across everything. But where it gets even more interesting to me is on the APIs and the SDKs side of things. Because if you imagine, if you've got essentially one giant database, if you will, data lake of all these actions and behaviors and devices and applications and everything that everyone's doing across the entire enterprise, and now you make an API for that, now really, really interesting things happen. For example, and this is just one of the examples, VMware has something called the Workspace ONE Trust Network. And the Trust Network is basically a bunch of security vendors, there's sort of 7 of them signed up so far, use those APIs and can talk to that data lake directly. So now, and notice these are different types of companies, so it's not just like there's malware, there's endpoint protection, there's, this is, there's 7 out of how many companies, that exist in this space. But these APIs and the SDKs are open. So now you actually can have these security companies hook into that data lake, and they can look across everything. And so you might actually have something where we can actually see a user logging in from like this device and that device, and they're too far apart from where it's possible to fly. So we know that there might be might be a hacker attempt or something like that. Or we can look at like McAfee and Symantec have kind of real-time malware updates where they're looking at the whole global network, and they might see something and they can feed it into this intelligence data lake, which then can updates, looking for certain patches, or maybe can change the rules that are looking for something. And then we can also look at, if one user did get infected with malware, or like click on a phishing email, we know who that user is, and everywhere else they're logged in, or everywhere else they might log in, and we can actually apply different, more restrictive NSX policies on the Horizon desktop because we know that account, that they were susceptible to phishing. So it gets really interesting from a security standpoint in what we can do if we actually have this intelligence across, again, all our users, all our applications, all of our devices, all platforms. And that's cool from a security standpoint. The real, though, interesting thing for me, and where I think like the real future is getting in, like VMware has this thing called mobile flows. And a mobile flow, so there's these connectors that they make that can hook into this mobile flow service, which is hooked into Workspace ONE in the data lake. There's a bunch of open source connectors. So all these connectors are open source. These are just some of them that are there. And they hook that intelligence, they hook into Salesforce, Encourage, Jira, ServiceNow, this kind of stuff. And all these connectors that hook this whole system into other business systems are open source, and they're on GitHub, so you can use those. You can write your own. You can hook into a mainframe via AS400 SNA via an SNA gateway if you want to. I mean, you can kind of go crazy. What's really interesting with this is all of these connectors hook this entire intelligence platform. Who knows who you are and where you are and what devices you're using and where you're connecting from, the applications and the platforms. They connect that into all the other business systems that exist out there on the back end. So that can enable interesting things like this thing that VMware calls mobile flows. This is an example of an email client where the bottom is an email, And that's just a regular email that doesn't have anything embedded into it. But if it's with in this case, it's a ServiceNow ticket. So ordinarily you get a ticket, you click the information, you click a button, it flips you over to the ServiceNow, it slides over to the web app, and you have to, even if you're single sign-on, you're in that app, and then when you're done with that, you're going kind of back into the, the original application. So there's a connector for ServiceNow where it can actually look at the email, figure out based on the content of what's inside the email, what it's trying to do, and then render for you this action card, and then say right there, comment or watch. It can give you actions to do right within the email client, and you don't have to switch into another application. And again, this is an example with an existing connector. You can make these into any of your applications and anything you've got within your company. Here's a different one for Salesforce. So an email comes and the Salesforce connector recognizes that and is able to, this action card there, which gives them some quick things that the user this sort of thing can do. So to me, this is kind of where we're starting to look at what the actual future of end user computing is evolving into, where we're actually looking at what we're doing with specific applications and what actions we're taking and starting to pull out different components. And this is something that people have been talking about for a long time, but it's sort of more interesting now because we've solved the device and user side of things. I say we solved the device things because now we actually can look at all the devices and manage natively all devices and interface natively with all devices. And we can look at the user across everything and hook into identity management and hook into all the SaaS systems. So now that we actually have that full visibility into what's happening within the organization, now these connections we build can get a lot more A, relevant, and B, they can be exposed in different areas. So you can envision where a connector being exposed within the email client, maybe on your mobile device, maybe it's within your desktop mobile client or the notification center on Windows or Mac, or it's web-based if you're kind of logging in that way. So because it sort of crosses the gamut of everything, these things can actually be pretty smart. At VMware internally, we've created a couple internal applications. One's called People Search, and this is just, it's an app that just, I guess the name is pretty self-explanatory. You type in a name, it hooks into our Workday and AD and all that kind of stuff, and has all information for the person who's working there. You can click and see where they are in the org chart, who their boss is, and phone numbers, and your departments and groups, and all that kind of stuff. Another app we created internally is called vApprove. So it's one of these things where, think of how many applications you have that require approvals, like Concur, Workday, ServiceNow, Jira, Coupa for purchasing. There's all these different applications that you've got little circles on. You got to go in here and approve this, and here, and it's is your bathroom time long enough to get through all those? And so this vApprove app is an app that VMware IT wrote internally that takes all that stuff via all those APIs and just floats up into one app. So if you're a manager or you're anyone within VMware, you've got one app to see all your approvals. And you can see, now this is an app that we wrote internally from scratch, but you can go back to the mobile flows and see if you can plug in at that SDK and API level, this app sort of writes itself. By the way, the idea is that these applications will become applications that are available for people to have and to use. But it's more interesting to me when you start looking at the whole, like I said, the baseline is all of our platforms and devices and everything about the user. We go up into that Workspace ONE service, into the intelligence data lake and multiple service. The real future to me is getting into microservices around these kinds of things. So I look at it as that, and this is if you want to take away the 30-second takeaway of this entire talk is again, this is the future of end user computing in the enterprise. It's the baseline. You can talk to all devices, you can push out native, you can configure them, you can update them, you can read them, you can do everything you need to do. You know who the users are, you know everything about them, and everything that they're doing. But imagine all that platform and all the microservices you can make out of there in terms of authentication and identification and the notifications and all that sort of stuff. And then you think of all those open source connectors that can plug into all your existing business systems. And now you imagine those microservices that exposes and the apps you can start building with that. And it becomes very, very interesting. I think this is a point now where it gets, we don't have to wait for, I should say the individual applications. The Concur has a fine iOS app, and Salesforce has a fine iOS app, and Outlook has a fine iOS app. So they're tying all those things together. And now they're tied together via plugins with buttons or just with like web links, you kind of go back and forth. But why can't Concur knows where I am? So it should be able to talk to Outlook to update my free busy time schedule. So when I'm in Singapore next week, I don't get schedule requests in the middle of the night because my free busy connector is set to my current home time zone, not to where I'm going to be in 3 weeks. So like when we move beyond, okay, how are we talking about applications, moving beyond web apps, moving beyond the desktop, moving beyond mobile apps? This to me is sort of absolutely the future of EUC. And what's interesting about this is people always talk about mobile versus web, or mobile versus desktop, I should say. Like big screen versus little screen. And I use Concur as an example. So Concur is a full screen desktop application. I mean, well, in this case. But Concur does a lot of little things. It does expenses and travel. So it's like the two halves of Concur. But then even within that, within travel, it does booking new travel, changing current travel, like viewing travel. Like the interface I want when I'm booking a trip is different than the interface when I'm at the airport and I'm looking to see what car rental place I used. And then you can see with on the expense side of things, adding a receipt is different interface than adding expense report versus approving expense report. So even kind of full-on desktop applications that have full big screens, we can absolutely see breaking these into lots of different little pieces. And so it's the idea that you could use these microservices and mobile flows to expose different functionality out of an application becomes pretty interesting. Now, at Synergy a couple years ago, Mark Templeton talked about snacking versus dining. Like on your mobile device, you pull your mobile device out of your pocket, whatever the number is, 300 times a day for 10 seconds at a time. And that's snacking. You're doing a little click approve, click a like. It's just a very short little thing. But real work is done at a full screen device. I like that, but I think that's painting a little bit too broadly. And I use an example of Outlook. There are some applications when you're using them at the big screen where you are 100% focused and you're doing the same thing for an hour straight. If you're writing a story or you're building a PowerPoint or you're doing some kind of CAD or something like that. But when you're using Outlook, I'm not using Outlook for an hour, but I'm not dining on Outlook. I'm like at a tapas bar. I mean, I did 200 emails for 10 seconds each. And so the idea that to say, all these little mobile flows and these little nuggets I'm pulling out of different applications, people think, that only matters when you're on your phone, but real work is done at the desk. I don't think that's true, because like I said, even at your desk, if you're in Outlook and mobile flows can figure out you got to do this in Salesforce, you got to do this, you got to do this. Think of all things you do on your desk that take 17 million separate steps. Click through. And if we had like these microservices, kind of what that could mean for things. So anyway, I guess I'm going to sort of like sum it up on that. Like I said, to me, as an industry, we have solved VDI versus RDSH. We've solved how to manage physical laptops, how to manage physical desktops. We've solved how to manage iOS and Android. Now, not every customer is there yet. And not everyone has got unified platforms, across all their entire environments. But these problems have been solved in the industry. The industry has solved the problem of identity management and persona across multiple devices. That has been solved in the industry. So when I'm sitting in my position, kind of like looking forward to seeing like what's next in the UC, it's all this kind of stuff, the microservices and the mobile flows and the intelligence that we can get when we sort of bring all this stuff together. Like I said, in order to get there, we have to solve all those base, foundational problems first and get those implemented within our organizations. But as I'm starting to think about like what EUC in 5 years looks like, this is what it is. I hate to say this is what it is while there's a picture of Outlook on the screen. So anyway,
it's a new quote too. Madden said this.
So that's it for me today. This is my first time telling the story. So I'm sure it'll be on video, like lots of places to kind of refine everything. But like I said, I work for VMware, but I'm not, there's no VMware slides here, apart from that first title slide. So for me, I'm just trying to figure out, how this whole UC direction goes. And this is my view of why I think it goes there. And obviously I chose to work at VMware because I feel like we're aligned on this. But yeah, this is where I think things are going. And hopefully I'll be right in a prediction once. All right, thank you.